Okay, hello everyone. We're just moving on to the next panel. So for those of you who went there yesterday, my name is Prune. I work as a hydrogen and renewable expert here in Australia for a governmental agency called Expertise France. And it is my pleasure to present this panel on low emission technologies. As you are all aware, many countries, including Australia, have set an ambitious goal to achieve net zero emission by 2050. Hence, they're investing in low emission technologies to support the energy transition. While the ambition and the opportunity are there, it is critical to determine how these technologies will work harmoniously to decarbonize energy system, provide new economic opportunities, and meet the needs for Australian industries, communities, and people. So for this last session, before the lunch break, we're welcoming 4 people, half are from France, and all of them have very different backgrounds from research to innovation industry. I know it is always a challenge to chair the last panel before the lunch break, but I'm sure that the story from our panelists will be so interesting that you will forget about lunch very soon. So welcome Alex, James, Gary, and Quentin online. Please have a seat. Okay, Quentin, are you also with us?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Thank you.
So today we will be discussing the following questions. First, how can we integrate low carbon constraints in the R&D and the innovation processes? How can we build an innovation ecosystem for environmental projects to attract public and private investment, as well as what are the challenges for researchers and entrepreneurs while developing these technologies? And finally, we'll have a look at the main differences between the French and the Australian ecosystem in this regard, and how we can collaborate more to achieve our common goal. So moving on to the introduction of our panelists. Alex, I may begin with you. So Alex is the founder of Wildlive Entertainment. It's a company specialized in developing sustainable solutions for music events. In the music industry since his arrival in Australia in 2016, he is the Australian ambassador of What de France, a brand created by the Centre National de la Musique to promote made in France music in the world. Alex is also the Australian ambassador of Grover, a French startup which has launched a new promotional platform for artists. And he created Wildlive Entertainment just recently, so 2022. And after the COVID crisis, to build an innovative music scene powered entirely by solar energy. So welcome, Alex. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Wildlive? What's the story there? How did you get to this idea? And why is it important for you to develop such a sustainable technology?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as you said, I've got different roles in the music industry, and at the beginning of 2022, I created Wildlive. So we specialize in creating a stage solution that's entirely powered with renewable energies. At the moment, we're using solar powered and batteries. It's something that's not new, but when I started working on this, I saw that a few festivals did it, and it's like, why, if this works, why not everyone is using it? And I realized that the approach was that most of the events were using existing stages, so sound and light solution, and trying to adapt the batteries in the solar array to that. And so it's technically feasible, but financially it was never viable. So that's why it never really expanded. So I decided to take the problem around and say, can we reduce the energy needs that we have on the stage and therefore find a smaller system to power everything? And so I started to work and look around the world for low consumption sound system and lighting. And I started working with a French startup called Pinte Solar Speakers that created a sound system that uses 10 times less energy than a normal sound system. Same thing with the lights. I'm working with a French startup called Meyer, created some new lighting that uses 8 times less energy. So with that, now we are able to adapt smaller battery system to it, and it become technically feasible and financially viable. So we're at the very early stages of this. I had my major first big event 10 days ago with Queen's Cliff Music Festival. We did 2 days of music. We had 11 bands, 15 hours, and everything solar powered. And I finished with 85% battery. So it was just a massive success. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a gig with Australian artist Kim Churchill, and I will be at Ocean Sounds Festival in Phillip Island on Saturday. So yeah, early stages. So as I said, the idea was, instead of starting with a big stage, with most of the other events I've done, we're standing smaller. At the moment, the stage is for an audience of 1,500 maximum. And the idea is to gather as much data as we can to scale up from there. Why I decided to work in that? Basically, a few factors. I think the first one was that I was working in the music industry, doing promotion, artist management, and touring. And I felt like I was not bringing anything new to the table. And also I was spending my time behind my computer. I was like, I don't see my life like that. I need to do something where I can innovate. That was the first factor. The second one was like, during the COVID crisis, lost most of my income in the music industry. So I started to work with the French Australian Chamber of Commerce, organizing events. And I was preparing an event with Alan Finkel on the hydrogen. That's where I discovered the world of hydrogen, because I had no idea about it before. And the third one, and I think that's what started everything, it's a conversation with a friend who's got 2 kids now. He's 42, I'm 37. And he said, oh, look at what world we're gonna leave to our kids. I'm like, we're still young enough to do something. We can't be just passengers here. We need to do something. And I started to realize that, I'm not doing anything. I'm just bringing bands from France to Australia, sending Australian bands to France. This doesn't make sense. So yeah, what can I do? And yeah, it all those different things happen. It's like life all of a sudden brought everything to the table to be like, okay, this is what you need to do now.
Thank you, Alex. This is such an interesting story. So moving on to James. James Seymour is the CEO of the Center for New Energy Technologies, called C4net. C4net is a company established to tackle sector-wide complex transition challenges with an innovative collaboration approach between industry, markets, operator, regulators, government, and leading researchers. Prior to joining C4net, James has led the creation and development of Ovida. And Ovida established a national solar and energy storage business and launched innovative microgrid business models. James was previously head of solar and home products at Origin, where he launched Australia's largest solar PPA business, and director of corporate development of a JV between Origin and global semiconductor leader Prune for the commercialization of a unique solar PV cell and module manufacturing technology. So welcome, James. It is an honor to have you today on this panel. And can you tell us a bit more about the activities of C4net, and why did you choose to leave the industry sector to work for this center?
Sure, thank you. And it's an honor to be here. So the Center for New Energy Technologies, or C4net, really came together because of the recognition of the complexity of trying to challenge such big issues individually. So government trying to solve things, or industry trying to solve things, or universities coming up with solutions, but not being in lockstep. And so by tackling those really big issues, to tackle those really big issues, there was a recognition that we actually needed to work together on it. And I'll explain more about, sort of a challenge that we're addressing later on in our discussion. What are the challenges in the energy sector? Well, it's going through a massive transition. So we hear of energy being spoken about a lot in the news and everything, and typically around price and the cost challenges that are there. But actually, the whole decarbonisation of an entire system is a phenomenal challenge to undertake. And yet the technology is there, it can be done. It's around how do we bring all those parts together in order to do it. That can be done efficiently, or it can be done really inefficiently. And C4net's role is to try and make it as efficient as possible. Now, we focus very much, the issues are sector-wide. Given that we're only a reasonably small centre, we tend to focus in on one particular area, which is from the distribution system, which is the poles and wires that are outside our house, through to consumers and how we interact. And that's because if we think of the grid of the future and the market of the future, then what we want that to look like, we can shape. And I'm not saying C4net can shape, I'm saying collectively we can shape. And that there are things happening to that. There's decarbonisation, there's decentralization of the technology, there's democratization of it. So if we go back only 20 years ago and look at how many Australian entities or individuals owned generation assets, it's down in the very, very low numbers. And whereas now it's in the millions. And that type of change, therefore, is not just a technology change, it's a people change. It's about how we interact and everything in there. So the other element of C4Net is then really it's the focus being on data enabled. So we're here in Victoria. Victoria has the smart meters attached to every house, every business, and has had so for over 10 years now. So there is a wealth of data and insights that can come from that. Now, our members, we have the industry members being the distribution businesses themselves, so the people who own the assets and the poles and wires and try to deliver that electricity to us. We have 6 universities that are there, including Swinburne, RMIT, Deakin, Melbourne, Monash and Federation University Australia. And then we have quite a bit of involvement from governments. Initially, the Victorian state government, very, very generous in their support of the centre and their vision of trying to grow the centre. But we've had participation from local governments, state governments and federal governments. My own journey, it really comes down to me being a nerd. And through school and everything, I was just always interested in solar technology. I can't tell you why, it just appealed, it pushed my buttons. I then moved into the commercialization of technology, actually in the food industry at first, a dairy application, but a university innovation that was applied in the dairy industry that had, became a global ingredient type thing. So, and that was, it just fascinated me. And I moved into venture capital and then into the sides of how do you take technology and bring it to life. But I really wanted to work in solar still. And so an opportunity came up in a solar technology development company, which was owned by Origin Energy at the time. And I think I was the 13th employee or something and joined, and we were in a little factory setting out the back of an industrial park in Adelaide, owned by an oil and gas company effectively. And yet here we were being a purely renewable company, as in we had a separate entity. We grew that to 60 people, and I reflect on, and they came from all walks of life into there. So they're from engineers through to operators and cleaners, etc. So we had, the amazing thing was though, everyone in there was mission driven. So we weren't getting the best salaries. We weren't getting the best conditions. We worked the hardest. We were passionate about the work that we did. We were so success bound on trying to get this technology, which was a unique cell technology, trying to get it out to the global market. And that then, that grew, and we ended up growing into the US, and we had it grew to about 250 people. Again, everyone was mission driven. It was never a chore to come to work. It was always that you were solving the problems of the world. So I think that just really stayed with us really strongly. These are the challenges. These are, potentially existential type challenges that sit there for us. And so I feel fantastic about what I do every day.
Thank you very much, James. This is such an inspirational story. Now I'm glad to introduce you, Professor Gary Rosengarten. Gary is Director of the Sustainable Technologies and Systems Enabling Impact Platform at RMIT, and is a professor in mechanical engineering. Prior to joining RMIT in 2012, he spent 6 years at the University of New South Wales, running the solar thermal energy and heat transfer research groups. Before deciding on an academic career, he spent 3 years at CSIRO and 2 years as a consultant in sustainable building designs. I'm very glad to have you here today, Gary. Can you tell us a bit more about the platform's activities and why you chose this area in research? Is it like Alex and James, a passion for solar energy? Is it something else? We're very interested in knowing more about that.
Thanks, Prune. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks everyone. Yeah, I've always had a passion for sustainability from a reasonably young age. I did my PhD, when I was looking around to do a PhD, I looked at basically 3 areas, and I ended up doing solar water heating at University of New South Wales, where it was world-renowned, also world-renowned in solar photovoltaics, but I was a mechanical engineer, and my expertise was always fluid flow and heat transfer, and I thought that was a great application for my expertise. When I finished my PhD, I went to France. I had a French government scientific fellowship. I went to CNRS. I had to learn French. I only learned German in school, and I struggled. But by the end of that trip, I could actually think in French. I could count when I added up my numbers. It was quite a nice experience. I lived in the outskirts of Paris. But that was quite fundamental. I continued on my research from there. Then I answer this question backwards, and I'll get on to it leads on to what I do now. And I kept on working in that field, basically solar energy, and I applied my expertise in various areas associated with thermal systems and photovoltaics a little bit. And I was beavering away as a researcher, trying to make impact by developing technology as an engineer and trying to roll that out. And recently I started to push the university to do something and have some coordinated effort in this area, not just energy, but all sustainability. We talk about climate change as a critical problem to the world. It is a critical problem, but it's not the only problem. There are other problems which are, in terms of not health, but the health of the environment. And one of those is biodiversity, and one of those is destroying habitats. And part of that could be the way we use our energy, the way we build our energy plants as well, even our renewable energy plants, but that's another story. So I pushed for the university to have a real voice and a coordinated effort in that area. And eventually this year we set up this, it's one of RMIT's 8 enabling impact platforms. And my one is sustainable technologies and systems. And it really covers 5 key areas of sustainability. And one of them, very, very important, is energy. We've got food, we've got water, we've got pollution mitigation, and of course, we've got circular economy. They're not independent, they work together, but they're the ways they're aligned with critical industrial sectors. We've got leads for all that. And it was driven by passion. And everyone in our platform is very passionate about what they do. Sustainability brews that type of passion. There was any other question I was answering? I think that's about it.
No, I think you covered it. Thank you very much. It's good to remind that it's not only about energy as well. So thank you, Gary. Moving on now to our last speaker. He's online. His name is Quentin Meyer, and he's a researcher in hydrogen fuel cell with 11 years of experience across the UK and Australia, and over 45 research papers published. His work is at the interface between research and industry. He has worked with large research groups and companies in the UK and in Australia on hydrogen fuel cell. Quentin is always keen on further networking, always finding time to answer people's questions about fuel cells, and can be reached on LinkedIn as well. So welcome, Quentin. Thank you for joining us online. I hope you can hear us, and don't hesitate to wave your hand if at some point you can't hear or see whatever is going on here. Well, Quentin, I will ask you the same as the previous panelists. So can you tell us a bit more about your activity and why you chose fuel cell? Is it out of passion? Is it an opportunity because of this emerging market on hydrogen? Let us know.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so basically tell you a bit about my journey in fuel cells. So the first time I came across a fuel cell was when I was doing my master's in university, about almost 14 years ago. And what I found out is that they were very simple devices. Like you can buy fuel cell toys quite easily from a few websites. But going from there to an actual device that you will put in a car is a hugely complex challenge. So I thought that's an interesting topic, and I'd love to learn more about it. So what I did is I applied for an internship in quite a large fuel cell companies, and I basically called them every day for a week. And eventually I got offered a 6-month internship, and the company afterwards funded my PhD. And the kind of topics that I focused on was basically understanding the challenges. It's one thing to fix a problem. It's another one to understand what is the problem that you're facing as a company. The kind of problem can be the materials you have are too expensive, they're not durable enough, the design doesn't work, and how do you fix it? So that's what I focused on during my PhD, when I published about, I think, 15 papers in 4 years. And after that, I moved to Australia in 2017, when initially I thought I would work as a consultant helping in fuel cell industries. And I worked for about 6 months for a company who now is in Melbourne, I think was doing quite well in hydrogen. And I was helping them basically understand the challenges of fuel cells. And then following on from there, I learned there was a hydrogen lab being launched in UNSW Sydney. And so I offered my services, and I've been working there as a lab manager and senior researcher for the past 4 years. The kind of problem focus in the group in UNSW are basically from catalyst synthesis, so actual chemistry of making materials, all the way to making systems, and we make fuel cell stacks. So we make product fuel cells that we actually use in our lab to power small demonstration devices, such as a small TV screen, phone chargers, and small scale products. What we really focus on is the whole supply chain, showing that you can make the materials and then you have to actually scale them up and put them in the real device that we make ourselves. So our expertise basically covers the whole area of fuel cells. I hope that gave you enough details for my introduction.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Okay, now we have about 30 minutes to go on with our panel discussion, and then I will open the floor for questions at the end. So the first topic I would like to discuss with you is the current situation of developing low emission technology here in Australia and the evolution for the past couple of years. So the previous federal government released a low emission technology statement. I think it was 2 years ago, and they were announcing an investment of more than 20 billion Australian dollar in new energy technologies over the coming decades. It was actually the second roadmap designated for the development of low carbon technologies here in Australia. And some of the goals are very ambitious, such as producing clean hydrogen under $2 a kilogram in the decade to come, or enabling ultra low cost for large scale solar and electricity generation. I think they were speaking about 15 Australian dollar per megawatt. So following these first roadmaps, the new federal government has also taken significant commitments towards reducing the CO2 emission, such as achieving the net zero by 2050. And my question is, how do these new ambitious policies impact the development of low carbon technology sector in general? Would you say that the general context, it can be including the new geopolitical order, including disruption of the supply chain during COVID pandemic, the war now that we have in Ukraine, as well as the general electricity and climate crisis that we're experiencing now, have all of this accelerated the deployment of the low carbon technologies? Is it the other way around? And maybe I want to start with Gary and James, because you have been working the longest in this area in Australia. So can you tell us a bit more about the evolution you are experiencing in the area?
Thanks, Prune. From my experience, it's gone from a slow burn to a massive acceleration, even in the last few years. Yeah, the amount of funding that is gone in, I think it is really accelerating things. And especially even COVID, I think has helped accelerate things. People see now we can come together, and this is what we call wicked problems. And it got, as the last panel showed, it got solved so quickly when people collaborate. And I think people are starting to understand that this is a wicked problem, and a very wicked problem, as James said. It's not easy to even just decarbonize the whole grid. And so there's a realization now, and through all levels of government, from federal government, state government, and local government. and people in technology picking that up. So I think we really are what I'm calling the next revolution. We've had the industrial revolution. I think this is the sustainable revolution. There's going to be such change. There are going to be massive changes the way we do things, from the circular economy to the way we use energy, the energy efficiency, as Alex said. I mean, it's such a simple thing, but people never thought about that before. People didn't care. Like, we can burn more gas, we can burn more coal. There's so much energy available. But the first thing you should do is cut the way you use energy, and then you put renewables in. And people are only starting to understand that now. So I really think we are in this beginning of this revolution, and our lives are going to change. People don't want to change the way they live because, you know, we're used to a very almost indulgent way of living. But I don't think we have to change that particularly. We just need to get that. We've got the technologies, as Alex said, that reduce the lighting power by a factor of 10. That's significant. And that's going to continue all the way we use heat for heating and cooling houses, etc. It's all changing. It's a massive revolution right now.
Thank you, Gary. Well, this is really good to hear. James, well, in your mind and continuing your activity, would you say you have the same feelings that things are changing and that we are living a revolution for low emission technologies development?
Yes, and I don't. So yes, I think there's an acceleration. And I think the engines, you know, if I take a step back, I actually think our engines are only just getting started now. And even now seeing it's hard to envisage change for a lot of people. So we talk about electric vehicles, for example, coming in and the change in electric vehicles. Now, as a technology change, it's not very big. You know, a car is still a car. It's still got 4 wheels. It still drives us around everywhere. We're just changing the fuel element that's in there. And yet, you know, think of the noise and the challenges that went on and were thrown up around, you know, potential adoption and, oh, it's going to take forever and everything. I actually think we're going to see it very much the other way. I think we're going to see it be a lot more rapid than we had anticipated. And the impact of that will be. I've lived through solar change and seeing the adoption there. And it still staggers me that so many people say, oh, we didn't see this coming, or we didn't see this being as big as it was. And it was like, well, why not? Because to me, it was always obvious. You know, in fact, it still feels slow that we haven't actually, you know, I'm amazed to walk down and see roofs that don't have solar on and everything, but that's my own personal bias. I think seeing the importance of having targets and targets that people buy into is really important. If we think back to the early noughties and the leadership that Europe took, and particular countries within Europe, in particular, France and Germany, around the solar space had goals. I can remember being at an IEA working group International Energy Agency working group in France in 2004, and we were sitting there talking about I can't remember the name of the program, but there was a program and an initiative, and we brought out a map with the group, and we were literally sitting there pointing out I think the 500 kilowatt systems that were there in France, and how we were really super excited because there'd be 10 more the next year or something. Germany came, and it sounds small, but a target was set, and there was an ambition followed that came. Germany set 1 million rooftop program in, I think it was 2005 or 2006. That changed the industry of solar, the amount of investment that went in, and Germany became the #1 installer globally there for quite a while. They didn't have the best solar insulation or anything like that. They just had a target, they had a willingness, they had a political alignment to it, and everybody worked towards it. And then you start saying, once that economic problem becomes big enough, the number of, if we think of the number of scientists and engineers who are working collectively on a very, very similar problem, and this is why I'm so bullish on EVs and battery technologies, is because that same technology, very, very similar technology that is being worked on for your your laptop or your EV is the same as what's your home, which is the same as what's out there for the storage spots in the technology. And that unlocks so many opportunities in the energy system. That's why I'm very bullish on it.
Just one quick other comment I forgot to mention is when you brought up the crisis, the Ukrainian-Russian war, I mean, that's also accelerated because people are looking at energy autonomy and independence and sovereignty. And so that's actually also speeding up what's actually happening in the renewable energy space. And James, have you ever driven a Tesla? It's not like driving a normal car. You feel like you're driving the next generation, not just the engines, the regenerative brakes. It's amazing. Yeah, and it does. And it's accelerating the rest of, as you said, it's accelerating the rest of that technology revolution.
It is, but it still gets me from home to the shops. You know, I don't actually have to change that much. It's just a much cooler way to do it. Like that's all. The one little addendum though that I would add is that right through that journey, I've observed people and communities, groups really wanting to latch onto what's the answer and looking for almost silver bullet type solutions. And that might be because of ideological problems with some, one technology or another, or that positions have been taken and it's awkward to remove from. It's not. It's a mix of technologies. It's the solving the problem, not just the technology solution. And that's probably, so as long as there's a plethora of technologies that are supported to try and attack it, that's where I think is a key point that needs to be made.
Thank you. I would love to focus now a bit on batteries and fuel cells. So Alex and Quentin, your activities both focus on the same area of low emission technology. So could you tell us a bit more about what's happening in this scene in particular? Because Gary and James, you have this overview that is on the general topics around sustainability. But for you, Alex and Quentin, it's very specific to one or two technologies. So can you tell us if you feel that's the same as James and Gary here in Australia, that people are generally more interested for such technologies, that you have incentive both from public and private sector, or is it different in your area?
Yeah, I guess for me, the best example is that I've done a lot of grant application with Creative Victoria for touring or album recording, never got any money. I did the first application with Wildlive for an event that is entirely solar powered and I got the money. So that is the best example to say there is interest. Regarding the technology, so as I said before, we are using lithium battery at this stage because it's the easiest way. And actually chat a lot with Quentin because what I would love to have, it's a hydrogen battery. And I think, yeah, we see the market of batteries, it's crazy, the number of Australian companies now offering batteries and even manufacturing batteries here in Australia. But for us, there's a lot of on social media, when you say we do this solar power thing, people come back and say, yeah, but you're using lithium battery. Lithium is not that sustainable. So that's why we're really trying to hoping that hydrogen will be solving that problem. And I think the general public is not aware of that yet. It's sometimes when you're working on that, it's been working on it for the last year and a half or two, making research. I'm in my bubble and I feel like everyone knows about it. And then when we were doing Queen's Music Festival and we're starting to chat to people, they had no idea about what was going on in terms of innovation. They knew about lithium batteries, but in the hydrogen field, for example, they've got no idea. So yeah, it's good to see that there's a momentum at government level, and also organization, like as I said, Creative Victoria is open to give funding for that, and but the general public still has no idea about the potential of all of this.
Thank you, Alex. Quentin, if we may have a bit of your view on the topics, and maybe if you can tell us how this the challenges and opportunity on the R&D scene will be reflecting then on the startup market industry scene.
So first thing is, as part of my activities, I'm also linked with the Hydrogen Society of Australia, when we get the chance to follow companies. And over the last 2 or 3 years, since they've increased funding in hydrogen, there's been about 100 to 150 companies that basically emerged, which are mostly startups who are working in the hydrogen space, which shows that there is a very strong momentum in Australia. What's quite interesting about these companies is most of them are quite small. So they're starting from basically people with an idea, potentially a link with a distributor, and from there, they're trying to set up hydrogen in Australia. And the kind of challenges that they're facing is typically these kind of projects require quite a large team. So the projects in Australia, there's a lot of excitement, but delivering the project is quite more challenging. So the big issue to me that I see is at the moment that I was even offered a job recently in a company in R&D somewhere in, I think in Brisbane, is the kind of projects they're aiming for, you need a much larger team. So while there is a lot of expertise and interest, there isn't as much manpower as you may need to do the projects that they're aiming to do. So it's actively developing at the moment, and I hope that the companies keep on growing as much as possible, with the most promising companies really building up to 50 to 100 people to deliver the projects that they're aiming for. Thank you.
Okay, James and Gary, I think you're working a lot to create more collaboration between industry and research. Have you experienced same challenges such as the one Quentin is speaking about? Are there any difficulties? I mean, are the expectations of the industry maybe too high for the current state of research? Is it how would you say the collaboration is going on this early stage market that is benefiting from a lot of visibility and also incentive?
So in terms of the skill side, there's always going to be a lag. It's just we've just got to deal with that, and that's and there's programs and everything that you can do to foresee that and try and invest in it. But it's also one of those that you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself because you might be on the wrong thing. So it's a very challenging thing, I think, from a policy perspective there. And you are seeing state governments around Australia really try to address that. It's a global challenge. So the type of challenges that you see locally are very, very similar global. And actually, probably one of the really big challenges out there at the moment, if you think bigger picture, is I know when you map out just Australia's decarbonisation challenge and what's there, there's people with their heads popping on the scale of what's actually needed to be done. It can be done, right? There's the same things, but it's just the scale of it. But the whole world's trying to do that at the same time. And that can create inequity between those who can afford it, those who can't, or those who can afford it more, and how you bring the whole world along and the balances that you hit and everything. I think they're real challenges that will be there. In terms of readiness, though, and the willingness to work, I see genuine collaboration trying to happen between industry, government, and research. I also see the challenges of it, and we come from different mindsets that are there. And I find with the centre, we spend quite a lot of our time with researchers trying to get them to understand the challenges both near and longer term of industry and how they evolve. It's of trying to get industry to understand the academic approach and the limitations of that and where it's best applied. So often industry will come to us with, oh, we want universities to solve this. It's like that's not a university challenge to solve that. That's not what they're wired to do and best placed to do. Whereas tell them the problem area, tell them the sort of boundaries of what can be done, but kind of let them go and discover and explore and in a bound way, but likewise then keep touching in, because we do find that we do very hands-on research. Sometimes I think that's very challenging for the researcher, and yet it's engaging. It brings industry along, and it helps both understand where when to zig and when to zag as you go along. I don't think anybody really has a fixed position on a 2-year project when the environment is changing so quickly that we're trying to do it in. So that would be my reflections.
Thank you, James. Gary, are you sharing the view of James around this balance between academic work and industry?
Yes and no, I think. For me, there's 2 different ways at university we translate our research. One is if we come up with the fundamental ideas independent of industrial collaborators, and then we try and implement that into industry. That's a bit harder because they'll say, well, we've got a solution, and they might have the problem yet. And there's sometimes we think we've got the solution, but we don't. It's not either going to be scalable, it's not going to be cheap enough, it doesn't apply to them. Then they think we're up in the cloud sometimes and we're not solving the right problems. The other way is that industry comes to us and say, here's the problem, and then how can you solve that? And that way there's no barriers. Even there's been cases specifically in the sustainability field and energy where industry, if they want to implement something new and change, they need to have leaders there that have got the capacity and the time to actually to help implement it and tell their managers, do the calculations. We've had opportunities in the past. We've got great technology that's even being paid by the government, and it's hard to put that on their roofs. It's going to save them 70% of their energy, but they don't have dedicated people associated with that. Australian industry has the reputation of not being very innovative. They don't, in Germany, and I know particularly Germany, I'm not talking about France, most PhDs go into industry. So they've got a research culture. I'm not sure about France, but they've been to sabbatical recently in Germany. So there's a culture of innovation and research in Australian industries. Everyone seems to be, a lot of the time, especially small to medium enterprises, even large, they don't have the capacity to do forward thinking. So that can be a challenge. Is there another point? I think that's the main issue I think we've had there.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. And that's perfect because I wanted to move on to the comparison of the French and the Australian ecosystem because I'm conscious of time. So I think that's will be what we'll be addressing last before opening the floor to questions. So my question is now for Alex. You have chosen Australia over France to develop your activities. Why is it that?
Simply because I was living here. As I said before, during the COVID crisis, I had to think about what was the next move. It's funny because Australia is often a very last territory that a lot of companies are going to think about in terms of development. So it gives me a lot of freedom. And that's the case with what the France, for example, was developing the brand. No one wanted to come to Australia because it's such a small market with Grover as well. So when I started to approach those companies that creating those new technologies, I had, an open field for me because I was like, oh yeah, we never really thought about Australia, so go for it. So I realized that was easier to create that collaboration with French companies. And also here in the music industry, I think people are looking for experiences. People go to events, even if it's been hard. We've got a massive country where I can do amazing things. Because the very beginning of the idea was, I wanted to create an event in amazing location around Australia. And the problem was always energy. So how can I do that? And I had this idea for 5 years. And as I said before, it's a number of factors that led me to this project, but that's one of them. So, yeah.
So you would say it's both, an opportunity because you were there at this time, but also the amount of natural resources in Australia for renewables were part of the choice. The innovation ecosystem was dynamic in your mind?
I also felt that there was dynamic in the music industry in that field. Realized later on that there was a lot of greenwashing, and realizing now that clearly we're not ready. But yeah, there's also, I feel that there's more money for us in the music industry. There's more money, so it's a bit easier to make it viable financially than doing that in France. There's a lot of initiative in France, but they need to have government funding to make it happen. Here, it's a bit easier in terms of funding.
Okay, Quentin, I will ask you the same question. So you're a researcher here in Australia, focusing on fuel cell. Why did you choose the Australian ecosystem for your activity?
So thanks for the question. So first thing, about 5 years ago, I was working in England on fuel cells, where basically the research area was with a lot of different groups in Europe. At the same time, when you're working in a field, when there is many people working in it, it can be harder to make a mark and to make a difference. At the same time, my partner was moving to Australia because her visa was expiring in England. And I was taking a look at the progress, and I was like, well, in Australia, there isn't that much going on, but there is a lot of very clear interest. So I thought, well, I actually have the expertise in fuel cells. So let's move to Australia and try to make a difference in Australia, basically, which so far has worked quite well because I've ended up helping launch a fuel cell group in UNSW. And the moment I think we are the first or second largest groups in fuel cell in the country. So that's how we look at it to Australia.
Thank you, Quentin. Now a question for James and Gary. You both mentioned it a bit before, the comparison between Australia and Europe in terms of innovation in those kind of technologies. So 2 years ago, we had this European Patent Office, along with the International Energy Agency, that released a 10 years study report on patents in the low emission technology area, actually. And looking at the main regional innovation trends, the study finds that since 2000, European companies and research institutes have led in patenting low carbon energy invention with around 28% of all international patents family in these technologies in the past decades. And among these European countries, France actually ranked second, just after Germany, and sixth in the world. Just as an example, we have the research center CEA Olon, who was leading the patent granting research organization in France and the leading research organization in Europe, with more than 7,000 active patent families at the beginning of 2021 and around 700 new inventions protected each year. So not to brag about French expertise, but my question is more, you know, Australia is so far away from France. So from an Australian perspective, do you have the feeling that France is one of the leading actors in the new low emission technologies scene? How is the view, if I can ask it that way, on France from this Australian perspective?
Well, I'll be honest here, and no, I don't think France is known as, in terms of at least translating. I didn't know they had so many patents. So that sort of fits into what my view is, that the science and engineering in France is excellent. Their research institutions are excellent, but the policies, I mean, nuclear energy, 70% nuclear energy. And I heard that they were trying to reduce the amount of nuclear plants, but then they're going to build a few more. I mean, it's non-polluting, so that's good. And they're only rolling out maybe a gigawatt of wind farms. So I looked at also funding there in terms of for this space. You mentioned at the beginning the low emissions technology roadmap had put aside 20 billion. I had a quick look online whether it was extensive just last night, and France put about 1 billion together. So there's a scale difference there, probably because of the nuclear, and the nuclear industry is government owned, and it's gone through a lot of problems recently with repairs. They've shut down half of them, and then also because of the very dry and hot weather, the rivers for the cooling systems have dried up a little bit. So there's issues there. I think that their climate is very, very different. As James even said, the solar, the proper term is irradiation. People, when you say insulation, people think it's insulation. It's confusing. Yes, I know. It's the solar radiation in France is obviously nothing like the radiation in Australia. The wind is probably better, but you know we've got a bit more of a history of really pushing that area much more strongly than France, as far as I my reading of it is.
No, that's actually really interesting. You know, obviously, France and Australia, we don't have the same energetic profile at all, for sure. But well, not getting onto the nuclear policy part, because for France, obviously, we consider it as a low carbon source of energy. We do have an ambitious strategy towards renewables, because we are aiming at 40% of renewable energy in our energy mix in the next 10 years to come. And we, for example, just taking hydrogen, we have a 9 billion euro investment for 10 years. So it's interesting to see that this didn't really translate, you know, on the Australian scene. And I would love to know, James, what's your take on that? Were you more aware of French expertise and French policies in this area, or do we need to to make more effort on our communication about it, maybe in comparison to other European countries?
So I think France is an industrial leader in the world. Australia probably punches above its weight in terms of trying to, you know, discovery and everything, but necessarily and has some real areas of capability. If you look at PV cell technology, for example, but that doesn't. There's both the discovery and there's the application and the industrialization and adoption then of that. And I think all of those are important, and we can really look to each other as to what's there. In terms of energy efficiency type measures and things like that, there's, you know, if we look to France, streets ahead of where Australia is. And yet when you look at DER adoption, so distributed energy resources adoption, solar, battery, etc., Australia leads the world on that. So, and that's around the application that's there. One thing that then goes really strongly to that then is the cultural elements as well. And just like an observation is that like in Australia, we're so wired to water, you know, we mustn't waste water, you know, it's got to be there. And I remember being in France and staying in French houses, and you'd often have the tap would be running. And I can't leave a room with the tap running, right? I have to go and turn it off. But if I left a light switch on, someone was onto it straight away and would turn it off. And that happened again and again. And so those cultural overlays that sit there and amongst all of us in how they affect that adoption can really impact right through to then how that technology translates.
Thank you very much. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I would love to open the floor if you have one or two questions from the audience.
Hi, Florence Cotel. Thank you very much. That's extremely interesting and extremely important conversations. I was wondering, it's fantastic to work and develop further our capacity to have low emission energy services. But do you think that there's enough efforts on working on recycling all the components for solar panels and for batteries? Because it seems that we're just creating another problem that we will have to face just a bit further down the track. And it seems to me that each time that you work on developing a new type of technology, we should have at the same time working in parallel other teams that just work with you on how we could reuse byproducts.
Okay, everything we do should be thought of in terms of circular economy. Okay, so that it's just everything that we do. But we shouldn't also shy away from the challenges, for example, on recycling solar panels, I think are way, way overblown. That's not a hard challenge. It's glass, it's aluminium. That's 90% of the product. We know how to recycle that. It's silicon, which is and then some rare earths in the materials that are in there. they're actually quite recyclable. We haven't set up the industries and everything to do that because the scale hasn't been coming through, but it's not a technological problem. It's just it's more of an economic problem. So if it's whereas if we took on something like nuclear, for example, it's a bit more of a fundamental problem because we're creating a problem that we don't know what the solution is down the track. And so I think, yeah, I get concerned when I hear about solar and things of the challenge. Even batteries are largely, they're recyclable, but is the industry there doing it now? No, they're not, because the scale isn't there. It's not worthwhile.
But do you have an idea of when we will need the capacity to be recycling all those materials? Because it's fantastic to know that we have the knowledge, but if we can kind of predict when we're going to need to have a whole system running to be able to manage high volumes, then maybe we should start into like getting.
Yeah, no,
prepared.
I think that's a really good point. And in fact, in the next, generally the lifetime of a solar panel on the roof is about 10 years, and we're getting to, well, that's what the
25, 30 years.
Okay, but 25 to 30 years, it has an end, but they're saying Breakthrough Victoria now is, you know about Breakthrough Victoria, it's anyway, they're putting out calls for industry to come together to work out how to recycle these. And as James says, it's, you know, there's also silver in there, which is one of the most expensive metals in there. So we can do it all individually. It's tricky. You've got to start from a panel and then crush it up and then get the glass, but it's there, but it's now. We need to start that industry now. That's why the funding is now, to get the industry going in the next few years, because it's predicted there's going to be a huge influx of people replacing solar panels now.
Well, Germany and France are getting there now because of their programs that started in the early noughties. They're getting to that sort of point. And they started, Germany, France and Italy, I think, brought in PV cycle in the early 10s type thing. So the critical mass was sort of getting there where they said, right, well, we can see 20 to 30 years in front of us, we're going to need to start having that. And so there's actually almost like a deposit scheme that goes on panels that are there. So it's not global. Europe has led the way in that circular economy thinking, but yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sure we can continue the discussion further, maybe around the table at lunch break, because for today we have to end here. I want to thank you, our wonderful panelists. I think the discussion was very lively and dynamic. I really hope this will also create more occasion and opportunities for more collaboration between France and Australia. And well, we are very glad to have you all today for this panel. So thank you very much. And we'll be heading for lunch now. Thank you.